the next general election. A moment the country needs.
But if the police decide to issue me with a fixed penalty notice, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down.
You told the country Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister. You then expelled him from Labour. You campaigned for a second EU referendum. Now you don't talk about the EU. And you dumped all the left-wing policies pretty much you once loved.
What does it say about Labor, but more importantly about the Conservatives? Because the Tories are falling apart, and we're seeing it with Conservative governments, I think, all around the world, even here in Australia.
The British Prime Minister has just crossed the line no leader has ever dared to cross in the modern age, and the fallout could bring down his government faster than anyone thought possible. Keir Starmer has declared open war on King Charles III. This isn't a minor disagreement, not a polite difference in views behind closed doors. This is a direct clash between the elected head of government and the Crown itself, something Britain hasn't seen in over 3 centuries. What just happened inside Downing Street and Buckingham Palace has sent shockwaves through every corner of the country, and within minutes, the story was everywhere. The Prime Minister's rage has become the centre of global attention, and the monarchy has been dragged into a political firestorm like never before. For days, rumours had been circulating about King Charles holding unusual private meetings, but now it's confirmed. The monarch personally requested a closed-door strategy session with Nigel Farage and senior Reform UK officials at Windsor Castle. 2 hours of discussions, away from cameras, away from the eyes of the public, and far beyond the limits of royal protocol. Palace insiders have confirmed the king wasn't just exchanging pleasantries. He was engaging in a deep political conversation about Britain's future. According to multiple sources, he questioned the government's handling of immigration, criticised Labour's economic strategy, and dropped a line that has since detonated across the political world. Perhaps it's time for fresh thinking in Westminster. Those words, simple as they may sound, have been described as the most political intervention by a monarch since the 19th century. When this revelation landed in the public domain, the timing could not have been worse for Keir Starmer. Labour's support has been crumbling under the weight of inflation, collapsing approval ratings, and streets filled with protests. Families are suffocating under energy bills that have tripled in less than a year. Food prices are soaring. The public mood is raw, restless, and furious. And now, in the middle of this national crisis, the king has been heard giving credibility to Labour's greatest rival. Within 48 hours of that Windsor Castle meeting, Reform UK's membership quadrupled, donations surged into the millions, and Nigel Farage seized the moment to brand himself the defender of Britain's traditions. Standing in front of Union Jack flags, Farage declared this was the turning point, where Britain chose stability over chaos. The symbolism was undeniable. The king on one side, Reform UK on the rise, and Starmer suddenly looking like the outsider. Inside Downing Street, panic quickly turned into fury. Cabinet insiders described the Prime Minister as completely unhinged after hearing the recording that leaked from the Palace meeting, a 47-second audio clip where King Charles's voice can be heard praising Reform UK for speaking to the concerns of ordinary people. At 11:47 p.m, the recording reached Starmer's desk. By midnight, he had summoned his entire cabinet for an emergency session. What unfolded behind those doors will be remembered as the night Starmer's career began to collapse. Witnesses say the Prime Minister slammed his fist against the table so hard the glasses shook. His voice, usually calm and calculated, erupted into what ministers later described as uncontrolled rage. "The king has betrayed his oath," he shouted. "This is sabotage. This is treason against democracy, and I will not tolerate it." But Starmer didn't stop there. According to 3 cabinet sources, he went further than any Prime Minister in living memory has dared to go. Pacing the room like a man cornered, he declared, "If the king wants to play politics, then let him feel what real politics looks like. The monarchy exists because Parliament allows it, not the other way around." The words sent a chill through the room. One minister audibly gasped. Another dropped their pen. Angela Rayner tried to calm the situation. Rachel Reeves begged him to reconsider his words, but Starmer was beyond control. In that single outburst, he had crossed the one red line every British leader has known never to cross: open confrontation with the Crown. By the morning, the headlines were devastating. The Times ran with Prime Minister's Royal War, the Daily Mail thundered, Starmer declares war on Charles, and even The Guardian, usually Labour's safest outlet, warned of a fatal gamble that could destroy his leadership. On social media, the storm was immediate. Within hours, #StarmerVs, the Crown had reached over 2 million posts, drowning every other story in the news cycle. polls revealed the damage in real time. 73% of Britons said the Prime Minister was wrong to attack the monarchy, and Reform UK overtook Labour in multiple key constituencies. Overnight, Starmer had transformed from the man who promised stability into the leader accused of waging war against Britain's most enduring institution. Downing Street was in chaos. Advisers described shouting matches, ministers threatening resignation, and even whispers of leadership challenges. Sue Gray, Starmer's own chief of staff, considered stepping down in protest. Veteran MPs whispered that Starmer had destroyed his credibility in one night. Diane Abbott, a figure with 4 decades in politics, said she had never seen a leader self-destruct so completely. WhatsApp groups buzzed with plots and counterplots, some discussing how to save Labour from collapse, others quietly planning for a successor. Inside Parliament, the mood was described as brutal, with MPs openly questioning whether Starmer could survive the week, let alone the next election. Meanwhile, King Charles has remained silent, refusing to issue even a single statement. But that silence is louder than words. In British politics, silence from the Crown is not weakness, it is power. It signals that the monarchy will not stoop to defend itself, that the Prime Minister has attacked something larger than himself, and that the people will decide where loyalty lies. Nigel Farage has seized this silence with precision, presenting himself as the statesman above the storm, declaring Reform UK the defender of unity, while Labour spirals into open civil war. And so, Britain finds itself on the edge of a political crisis it has not seen in centuries. A monarch accused of meddling, a Prime Minister accused of treason against tradition, and a rising movement ready to seize the throne of politics. The chaos that exploded from Starmer's midnight tirade didn't end with the morning headlines. It deepened by the hour, dragging the Prime Minister and his entire government into a storm unlike anything Britain has seen in generations. By dawn, Labour MPs awoke to the political equivalent of an earthquake. Phones buzzed non-stop, inboxes overflowed with panicked messages, and WhatsApp groups across Westminster lit up with one single question. Had their leader just destroyed Labour's future with 10 reckless words? By 8 a.m, senior Labour figures were already in damage control, frantically drafting statements to soften the Prime Minister's remarks. But it was too late. The narrative was already out of their hands. Starmer had declared war on the Crown, and Britain wasn't forgiving. The backlash reached beyond politics. Outside Downing Street, protesters gathered before breakfast. They weren't reform loyalists nor die-hard monarchists. They were ordinary Britons, furious that the man elected to deliver stability had instead chosen to ignite a constitutional crisis. Placards read, "Hands off the Crown" and "Starmer out now." Police reported that the crowd swelled to nearly 10,000 within hours, many carrying Union Jack flags and singing "God Save the King." It was the kind of imagery that every government dreads. Public fury directed not at policies or parties, but at the Prime Minister himself. By midday, footage of the demonstrations had gone viral, racking up millions of views and drowning Labour's attempts to regain control of the story. Inside Parliament, Labour's parliamentary meeting was described by one MP as a firing squad. Only the Prime Minister was standing in front of it. Backbenchers lined up to tear into Starmer's judgment. Veteran MPs reminded him of history. No Prime Minister survives a full-scale war with the monarchy. Younger MPs, terrified for their seats, demanded an apology to the King, but Starmer refused to back down. His defiance only made the fury worse. When one MP asked whether he realised his words might have gifted the next election to Farage, Starmer reportedly snapped, "If defending democracy costs me the premiership, so be it." The silence that followed was telling. Few were ready to follow him down that path. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage played the role of statesman to perfection. Instead of celebrating Starmer's collapse, he positioned himself as calm, respectful, and above the chaos. In an early morning press conference, Farage stood before the cameras with a steady tone. "Our institutions are not perfect, but they are the foundations of this nation. The monarchy, parliament, the rule of law, they stand above petty politics. While others tear at them, we will defend them." The contrast was brutal. Starmer was seen as raging against the King, while Farage was defending tradition. Polling released hours later confirmed the shift. Reform UK surged by 11 points nationally, overtaking Labour in multiple swing constituencies and placing Starmer's party on the brink of collapse. Downing Street's corridors turned into battlegrounds. Advisers screamed at each other over strategy. Should Starmer double down and frame himself as the defender of democracy against royal interference, or should he apologise and hope to contain the damage? Both paths seemed impossible. One aide admitted to reporters off the record, "We're finished either way." If he apologises, he looks weak. If he doesn't, he looks unhinged. The trap has closed. By late afternoon, rumours began to swirl that several cabinet ministers were preparing resignation letters. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson allegedly drafted one before being persuaded to wait. Transport Secretary Louise Hay told colleagues she could not defend Starmer on the airwaves. Most shockingly, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner was said to be deeply torn and privately furious that she had been dragged into a constitutional crisis she never wanted. Financial markets reacted in real time. The pound slipped against the dollar, government bonds sold off, and headlines in the Financial Times screamed of constitutional risk. International observers weighed in too. In Washington, senior officials quietly expressed concern about Britain's political stability. In Brussels, EU diplomats smirked at the irony. Britain, the nation that once prided itself on stable democracy, now teetering on the edge of a full-blown constitutional meltdown. The global stage was watching as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom went head-to-head with his king, and nobody believed he could survive it. But the most devastating blows were yet to come. Late that evening, a second leak from inside the palace dropped like a bombshell. This time, it wasn't just a clip of Charles praising Farage. It was a transcript of the full meeting at Windsor Castle. The text, published in the Daily Telegraph, confirmed that the king had indeed raised questions about immigration policy, economic hardship, and even Labour's failure to address the cost of living crisis. The transcript quoted Charles directly. "Families cannot carry the burden much longer. If government will not listen, then others must." The words were explosive, an unmistakable rebuke to Labour's record. While the palace refused to confirm or deny the authenticity, the damage was immediate. It gave Farage the ultimate weapon, proof that the king himself had questioned Labour's leadership. Starmer's team panicked. Ministers begged him to issue a carefully worded statement, showing respect for the monarchy while standing firm on Labour's principles. Instead, Starmer dug in deeper. In a televised address that night, he stared directly into the camera and declared, "Britain is a democracy. No king, no matter how well-intentioned, will dictate the policies of an elected government parliament, not Windsor Castle, decides the future of this nation." The words were meant to sound strong, but to millions of viewers, they sounded like open hostility toward the crown. The backlash was immediate. Twitter lit up with clips of the speech, captions reading "Starmer versus Britain," and memes portraying him as a man at war with his own country. Overnight polls showed Labour plunging another 8 points. By the end of the second day, it was no longer a question of whether Starmer had damaged his leadership. It was whether he could even survive the week. MPs openly discussed letters of no confidence. Journalists camped outside Downing Street, reporting on rumours of cabinet coups. Bookmakers slashed odds on his resignation, and through it all, the king remained silent, watching the Prime Minister twist in the wind. The silence itself had become a weapon. Every day, without a royal response, deepened the impression that Starmer stood alone, isolated, raging against a centuries-old institution that would outlast him. Britain had entered uncharted territory, and the man who once promised to restore stability now looked like the architect of chaos. Keir Starmer's leadership was hanging by a thread. What had started as a furious outburst behind closed doors had now become a national crisis that no one could escape. Inside Parliament, Labour MPs described the atmosphere as toxic, suffocating, and unsustainable. Every corridor buzzed with whispers. Every committee room became a plotting ground, and every interview with a Labour minister turned into a desperate attempt to defend the indefensible. The party that once promised stability was now consumed by the flames of its leader's own rage against the crown. The Labour backbenchers had reached breaking point. Senior figures privately admitted they could no longer defend Starmer to their constituents. Some described receiving hundreds of angry emails within hours of his televised address, with voters branding the Prime Minister a traitor to Britain and the man who declared war on the king in traditional Labour strongholds. Community groups began passing around petitions demanding his resignation. The fury wasn't limited to monarchists. Ordinary working families, crushed by the cost of living, saw the spectacle as a distraction from their suffering. For them, Starmer had taken his eye off the crisis at home to pick a fight with the crown. As one Labour MP put it bluntly, "We are facing the greatest cost of living disaster in modern history, and our leader chose to start a constitutional war. We are finished." The Parliamentary Labour Party meeting that followed was one of the most brutal in living memory. More than 100 MPs took turns tearing into Starmer's leadership. Some demanded an apology, others urged him to step aside. Several accused him of single-handedly handing Nigel Farage the keys to number 10. Witnesses said the meeting descended into shouting matches, with MPs screaming over each other while Starmer sat stone-faced at the head of the table. At one point, an MP shouted, "You've attacked the idea of Britain itself." Another accused him of arrogance bordering on madness. For the first time, loyalists who once defended him publicly now sat in silence, unwilling to spend any more political capital on a leader who had become toxic overnight. Meanwhile, whispers of succession grew louder. WhatsApp groups among Labour MPs became obsessed with one question: who could replace Starmer and salvage what little remained of Labour's credibility? Angela Rayner's name circulated constantly, though allies admitted she was reluctant to move against him openly. Rachel Reeves was floated as a stabilising figure for the markets, while Wes Streeting positioned himself as a fresh start. Diane Abbott reportedly urged colleagues to choose survival over loyalty. The plotting was no longer hidden. It was open rebellion, thinly veiled by procedural talk of options and pathways. Outside the Labour Party, Nigel Farage capitalised on every development with surgical precision. Each time a new poll showed Labour collapsing, he called a press conference to project calm authority. He did not gloat, he did not shout. He framed himself as the man of order in a time of chaos. Britain needs calm, not conflict. Respect, not rage, Gesborsi, he repeated in front of cameras, always flanked by Union Jacks. Reform UK headquarters buzzed with activity as donations poured in, volunteers flooded phone banks, and local branches reported membership surges that no modern party had ever experienced in such a short time. Analysts compared the surge to the Brexit wave, only bigger. This time, it wasn't just about leaving the EU, it was about defending Britain's institutions themselves. The media piled on, each headline more damning than the last. Starmer's gamble becomes his funeral pyre, declared the Telegraph. The sun-plastered PM at war with the King across its front page. Even international outlets joined in. The New York Times ran with British Prime Minister challenges monarch in historic showdown, while Germany's Der Spiegel described the crisis as Britain's dangerous civil war of institutions. The global framing was clear. Britain was no longer a model of stability. It was a nation unravelling under a Prime Minister who had lost his grip. Starmer tried to fight back, but every move only deepened the disaster. When he attempted to rally supporters in a speech at a Labour rally in Birmingham, protesters drowned him out, with chants of "God Save the King" and "Starmer out." The images broadcast on national television were devastating. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom being heckled by his own people, forced to pause while security scrambled to restore order. Clips spread online within minutes, racking up millions of views, reinforcing the image of a leader rejected by the public. The constitutional stakes escalated further when Conservative MPs seized the moment. Tory backbenchers began openly discussing whether the monarch should intervene to dissolve Parliament if the government collapsed. Though Downing Street dismissed this as nonsense, the whispers fed the perception that Starmer's authority was already gone. Senior figures within the Conservative Party admitted privately that they didn't need to lift a finger. Labour was destroying itself, and Reform UK was doing the heavy lifting in taking its voters. By the evening of the third day, a chilling possibility began to dominate Westminster chatter. That Britain could face not just a political crisis, but a full constitutional showdown between Parliament and the monarchy. Could a Prime Minister survive while openly at war with the King? Could Labour win an election while seen as hostile to the Crown? Most MPs already knew the answer. As one shadow cabinet member confessed to a journalist, "The monarchy will still be here in 1,000 years. Starmer will be gone within 1,000 hours." And yet, the King's silence remained unbroken. No statement, no clarification, no rebuttal of the leaked transcript. It was this silence, cold and deliberate, that made Starmer look weaker by the hour. To the public, the contrast was impossible to ignore. A raging, desperate Prime Minister flailing against an institution that needed no words to crush him. Britain was not just witnessing a political collapse, it was watching history repeat itself, as leaders who defied the Crown had always met the same fate: humiliation and downfall. The crisis that began with a single furious outburst from Keir Starmer had now engulfed the nation. What started as whispers of doubt in Parliament had transformed into a tidal wave of rebellion, and the Prime Minister was standing on the edge of political extinction. His government no longer looked like a ruling force. It looked like a crumbling fortress, besieged from all sides. Ministers whispered of resignation, backbenchers plotted openly, and the public turned with a vengeance. The story was no longer just Starmer versus the King. It had become Starmer versus Britain itself. The first crack came at dawn, when Transport Secretary Louise Hay walked out of Downing Street and confirmed she could no longer serve in a government that, in her words, placed itself in direct conflict with the very heart of the nation. Hours later, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson followed, citing the need to restore unity between Parliament and the Crown. Their resignations landed like thunderclaps. Within minutes, the airwaves were filled with speculation of a domino effect that could bring down the entire cabinet. And indeed, the pressure mounted fast. Rumours swirled that Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, had privately told allies she was finished defending the indefensible and was considering her position. The image of unity that Starmer once projected had shattered. His cabinet was dissolving before the public's eyes. The parliamentary rebellion intensified. By mid-afternoon, dozens of Labour MPs had submitted letters of no confidence, while others openly declared their intention to challenge Starmer's leadership. The corridors of Westminster buzzed with names of potential successors: Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, Wes Streeting, all of them preparing for the inevitable. Journalists described the atmosphere as that of a party already in opposition, not one clinging to power. In one committee room, a senior Labour MP was overheard saying, "We have two choices, remove him now or let the voters remove all of us later." That sentence captured the mood perfectly. Starmer was no longer just a liability. He was an existential threat to Labour's survival. The public's anger boiled over. Outside Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered, waving Union Jacks and chanting, "Long live the King." It wasn't a rally for Reform UK, nor a Conservative stunt. It was ordinary people, united by outrage at a Prime Minister who had crossed the line. Families, veterans, pensioners, students, an unlikely coalition, but all of them carried the same message: loyalty to the Crown over loyalty to Starmer. The images dominated the evening news, painting a picture of a nation rallying behind the monarchy, while its government crumbled into chaos. And then came the ultimate humiliation. Nigel Farage, flanked by Reform UK MPs and candidates, stood outside Parliament and addressed the nation. Calm, measured, statesmanlike, he declared, "At a time when Britain needed stability, Labour chose division. At a time when Britain needed respect for tradition, Labour chose to attack the very institution that unites us. Reform UK will not make that mistake. We stand with Britain, we stand with its people, and we stand with the Crown." The speech was carried live across every channel, and for many Britons, it sounded less like the words of an opposition leader and more like those of a Prime Minister in waiting. Polling released just hours later confirmed the shift. Reform UK had surged ahead of Labour nationally, leaving Starmer trailing in third place. By nightfall, Starmer's premiership was collapsing in real time. Senior aides resigned, one after another. MPs flooded television studios to call for his removal. Betting markets slashed his odds of survival to near zero. Inside Downing Street, chaos reigned. Phones rang unanswered, staff cleared their desks, and the once mighty machine of Labour governance had ground to a halt. The man who promised to bring stability after years of Brexit chaos had instead delivered Britain's greatest constitutional crisis in living memory. And yet, through it all, King Charles remained silent. He didn't need to speak. His silence was the most devastating statement of all. It projected strength, stability, and endurance, the opposite of the desperate Prime Minister flailing on television screens. In that silence, the public heard a message. The Crown will outlast any politician, and Britain's institutions will not bow to the anger of one man. Starmer, by contrast, looked small, temporary, and broken. As the clock struck midnight on the fourth day, whispers turned into certainty. Starmer would not survive the week. Some said he might resign to avoid further humiliation. Others speculated that Labour MPs would force him out before Parliament returned on Monday. But one thing was clear to all: Keir Starmer had made the greatest mistake a British Prime Minister could make. He had taken on the monarchy, and in doing so, he had declared war not just on the King, but on the very idea of Britain itself. The fallout was total, the damage irreparable, and the end inevitable. Britain now stood on the edge of a political realignment not seen since the days of Churchill and Attlee. Reform UK was rising as a government in waiting. The Conservatives, battered and bruised, quietly prepared for their own comeback. And the monarchy, untouched and untouchable, emerged stronger than ever. Starmer, meanwhile, would be remembered not for his promises of stability or his plans for reform, but for the week he lit the fuse on a constitutional crisis and brought his own career crashing down. This was not just politics. This was history in motion. A Prime Minister destroyed, a monarch strengthened, and a new political order rising from the ashes of Labour's collapse. Britain will never be the same again.